Good morning, everyone. Dan Bates, President and CEO, Greater Hamilton Chamber of Commerce, and we are thrilled that you could join us this morning for Coffee and Conversations. So today we're really excited. We will get to the topic in a little bit, but we're going to be talking about workplace stress and good mental health and all those things, those signs to see if you need to address yourself or your employees and how it impacts your place of business. So this is hopefully the first in a series that we're going to be doing with Community First Solutions. And our presenters today are going to be Lydia and Eleanor, who I think goes by Ellie. So we will get back to them in a minute. Those of you that are on Zoom with us, you can ask questions. You can either type them in the chat box, or I'm sure the presenters won't mind if you interrupt them to ask a question. If you are on Facebook Live, type your questions in, and Tiffany will make sure that those questions get answered by our speakers. This will also be stored on our YouTube once this is over. So if you want to go back and refer to anything that was covered or share it with other people, you can share the YouTube link. So with that, you know who I am. We're going to find out who all of you are. Gino, you're going to do self-introductions. Gino, you are muted. Someday we can take that phrase out of our vocabulary, but obviously not yet. You're still muted, Gino.
Even still here.
I think.
All right.
So why don't we?
I'll do introductions. Oh, there's Gino. He's back.
He's back.
All right. Kelly, would you like to tell us who you are, what company you're with?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So I'm Kelly Kraut. I am the director of Butler Soil and Water Conservation District.
Great. Glad to have you with us today. Sandy.
Good morning, Sandy Kusnoff with Frank's Glass.
All right. Thank you for being with us today. Ben.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Ben Cornice with First Financial Bank.
Jennifer.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer with Modern Psychiatry and Wellness. It's great to see so many people on this morning.
Glad to have you with us today. Tracy.
Good morning. I'm Tracy Stivers with BCW Workforce. We offer workforce solutions for both businesses and job seekers.
All right. And Chris.
I'm Chris Cannell. I'm Community Outreach Coordinator for the Hamilton City Schools. I connect students with part-time jobs in the area.
Right. Glad to have you with us today. Shelby. You're muted, Shelby. Or we can come back to you. All right, we'll come back to Shelby. Nancy. Or Gino.
I'm back. I'm sorry, guys. I couldn't find my screen to unmute it, so I had to log back in. But
You're fine.
I want to hear Laura's voice much better than mine anyway. So good morning, everybody.
Tiffany.
Hi, I'm Tiffany Grubb, Director of Marketing here at the Greater Hamilton Chamber.
And I probably didn't properly introduce myself. I'm Laura Merrill with the Greater Hamilton Chamber. All right, did I miss anybody? You're all a little small on my screen today. Okay, I think we're good. So Lydia and Ellie, would you like to take it away?
Absolutely. So I'm Ellie. You'll see me up as Eleanor, but Ellie is fine. Lydia and I are counselors at Foundations or Community First Solutions. And what we're going to talk about today is understanding impact of COVID, identifying workplace stress, and we're going to go a little bit into solutions on how to support employees.
Ellie, I'm going to interrupt you. Can you turn up your sound a little bit?
Is that sounding any better?
Yes, I'm hearing you louder.
That's good for me.
All right, so just kind of a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So a little bit on impact of COVID on the workforce, just some trends that we saw that affected workplace well-being, employee well-being, and then kind of just impact of that change on today's workforce, what that might look like, and some things that we need to be considering moving forward. Then getting into indicators of stress, impacting workplace function. What does it look like? Everyone talks about stress, but like, what actually is it? And then some solutions, what you guys can do as a leadership position. So we focus a little bit more on broad solutions rather than individualized solutions, but we can talk more about this as we go.
Absolutely. All right, and now we're going to be looking at understanding the impact of COVID-19 on the workforce. So as you can kind of see through these charts here, these are the different types of degrees. So you see high school or less, some college, associate's degree, and bachelor's degree or higher. So as you can kind of see with these trends, high school or less, they had the most job loss throughout college. So when we get to the end with questions and discussions and things like that, we'll kind of talk about how you guys have seen this in your communities. So when we look at COVID-19, we can see throughout the whole process, I'm sure you guys definitely saw it as well. There was loss of employment. There was a lot of socioeconomic strain, people losing their incomes, people having inconsistent incomes, things like that, people having to run through their savings, just the general anxiety, the health anxiety that was everywhere, not knowing when you were going to get sick, that caused a huge strain on mental health. But that plays in, back into how you perform at work. Also, people were isolated. Humans aren't meant to be isolated. So there was increased social isolation throughout that time as well.
Right, and this is just kind of tying into that last slide here. Some of the broader impacts of COVID on industry. So you can see like mining, for example, canceled 19% of capital expenditures. And then manufacturing was about 10%. And bringing it back to that last slide, primarily we're seeing people with some college or lower level of education employed in these industries. And these were widely the greatest impacted by COVID.
All right, so this is from a screenshot from the Gallup poll. I don't know if any of you have heard of that, but it's a poll that goes around to just a lot of people and gets pretty good overall takeaways of the world as a whole. So this looked at all the countries, but the top takeaways from the poll, what they found, and I believe, I don't have my notes right in front of me, but I believe this is 2023, so the most recent, or 2022 at the latest. So you can see that the top takeaways of this is that the United States, we are stressed at work. We're the second highest regional percentage of employees who say that this is now a good time to find a new job. Also the highest regional percentage of female employees who experience high daily stress. So we're pretty stressed at work, and this kind of is a good example of what that looks like and how we're comparing to all of these other countries, across our world. All right, so when we look at this over here, this is from 2019. So we can kind of see the United States as a whole and where we were at with mental health, right? So 18.07 of adults are experiencing mental health. 4.31 are experiencing severe. We can look at Ohio here. We're pretty low ranked, but we can see we're kind of moving up there. And then we jump over to 2022, where we have now made a significant increase of 2.24%, jumping enough to the point where they point us out with Nebraska, Wyoming, and Oklahoma. So it's increasing, and I don't think that is a coincidence, right? Especially when we look at those COVID stressors that occurred between 2019 and 2022. All right, so now we're going to kind of talk about what is stress. And I believe this goes over to Ellie.
Yes, so this is just a nice broad definition of what stress is. So any internal or external stimuli that evokes a biological response is considered stress. So we might think about things, we might worry about things a little bit, but until it affects us physically, it's not technically considered stressful. And you can go to the next slide here.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so then defining and understanding stress a little bit further. So we all kind of understand what stress is, right? We've all heard about it, we all talk about it, we say we're stressed, but I wanted to break down just the different variations of stress and their implications for you, especially in a workplace setting. So the first one is short-term stress that really can be very healthy, very natural. We all have it to some capacity. Some examples I have here is like disagreement with a spouse. Maybe you forgot your dinner reservations or you messed up on a date night. Stressful, not a huge big deal, not chronic, not long-term. Hosting a presentation can be stressful, a little worrying, but overall, not chronic, not prolonged.
And it's motivational, right? So you get that idea that it's like motivating you to do something. So it's a positive effect, if anything.
Mm-hmm. And we will get a little bit more into what healthy stress is in our next slide as well. Going on into chronic stress, this is where these benefits start to decline. Now it's not just one thing is happening, it's daily. You're not able to move forward, not able to adapt to your circumstances. And that's really when some of that motivation starts to really decline. So some examples is now daily relationship conflict over a long period of time. Toxic workplace over time can also contribute to chronic stress. So here is where we get into the healthy stress, also known as eustress. So actually beneficial, releases some endorphins, can temporarily even boost our performance. So it can help your employees meet daily challenges, motivate them to reach their goals. So things like starting a new job, exciting but stressful. Receiving a promotion, taking on extra responsibility, exciting, also stressful. So again, to get into, and we will have a graph that better highlights where this arch or this peak kind of plays out, but there's a good amount of stress where it really does help our systems rise to the challenge and engage to whatever we have in front of us. But once that becomes prolonged and just chronic, it no longer works as that function and it becomes very distressing. All right, without getting too much into the biological aspects of stress, I did want to touch on adrenal fatigue. So you can see your little adrenal glands in this little picture here. What happens is that our adrenal glands naturally produce cortisol to keep us motivated, keep us adapting to our environments. And once there's an excess amount of cortisol in our system, we tend to run a little bit dry, and that takes time then to replicate, reproduce. And when we don't have enough of that going on, we don't have enough to manage our daily stressors anymore. So that's when you start to see burnout, lower cognitive functioning, so poor decision-making skills, poor emotional regulation, not being able to focus, and learning and adapting new skills is not readily available during this state at all either. And then this is the graph I mentioned before, where you kind of have here at the very bottom, low performance, very calm, very bored, not stimulated. And then once stress increases, we kind of get to that optimal performance where we're focused, we're energized, we're challenged, kind of in that happy medium. And then once it gets too far, too long, is when we settle down into distress or prolonged chronic stress.
And one thing I'll say on that graph too is it's the kind of idea of just doing a bunch of like push-ups at the same time. Like if you do 30 push-ups a day versus like, let's say 5 push-ups a day in this calm zone, you know, that's going to get you motivated. That's going to get you ready to maybe work out. And then you do 20 and then you're in this energized challenge zone. It's feeling really good for your body. And the next thing you know, you're doing 50 push-ups And that's going to lead your body. Let's say I'm not someone that does a lot of push-ups, so maybe people are doing more in this group. But it's like if you're doing 50, your body's going to get fatigued. It's going to get burnt out. It's going to feel tired. So it's like we've got to find that balance. That was the example that the website that this graph is from was giving, just to kind of give some more information on that there. But so let's kind of talk about the physical outcomes associated with chronic stress. So these are all the things that are probable to happen, have a higher chance of happening when we sit in what Ellie was talking about, in that state of this chronic prolonged stress that continues over time. So then we're looking at things like dealing with insomnia. So not being able to sleep at night, staying up all night. You can see directly how that would impact someone's work performance, right? Even driving to work tired is not a super good idea. So then that leads us into fatigue, feeling tired all the time, never feeling like you have that energy, leading into like very physical body effects like that high blood pressure, stomach issues, digestive problems, and the more studies and things that they're doing about impacts of chronic stress, they're finding it can have a huge impact on premature aging. So that is an impact as well. When we kind of ignore these physical responses, so let's say, you know, you've been feeling fatigued, or you've noticed a coworker or one of your employees has been feeling fatigued for, you know, a couple, 3-4 months, it's like that could lead to things like depression, anxiety, irritability. That could also lead to just in general poor coping habits. So isolating themselves. Maybe it was an employee that was once sitting in the lunchroom, always having lunch, and all of a sudden they've become a little bit more withdrawn and things like that. So that could be due to chronic stress and kind of that anxiety, that depression, that irritability. And then the next slide kind of leads into this idea of how stress kind of impacts people as a whole, right? Like why does it matter if our employees are stressed, or if employees are stressed, if the people at we've got a pyramid right in front of us that maybe at the bottom layer of the pyramid are feeling stressed. It's like we need those basic needs met before anyone else. So when we talked about that graph earlier, that idea of that kind of perfect middle ground, if employees aren't having things like food, water, warmth, rest, they're not going to meet that top of the pyramid here, this self-actualization, where it's like, you know, including creative activities, you know, bringing new ideas to the tables, feeling accomplishment. So it's like making sure it's very important that we have these basic needs met, these security, safety, food, warmth, rest. And when we talk about COVID and stress during COVID and work stress during COVID, you know, our health stress was high, our money stress was high, those basic needs weren't met. And then we move over to the next picture I have here, just kind of the idea that we're all in this together, right? So this, you've got kind of the macro system. So that's the attitudes and ideas of the culture. We've got the exosystem looking at industry, social services, local police, neighbors, the mesosystem, that's all kind of connecting there. And then we've got the microsystem, so family, school, health services, church, and then the individual. So the reason we put this in here is to kind of show how it all branches out, right? So you see an individual employee, an individual person, if they're experiencing these chronic stress impacts, that's going to branch out to their family. Then that's going to branch out here, and then that's going to branch out into their industry, into their work, therefore impacting their work and performance overall. So just we put this in here to highlight the importance of stress and what just kind of the ripple effect it has, you know, and what that looks like. So kind of going back to just kind of signs of chronic stress at work, more specifically, right? What does this look like? What can you recognize in your employees to say, maybe they're feeling a little bit more than just that eustress, that healthy motivational stress we discussed earlier. So that's going to look like that fatigue, particularly in the early morning. You know, there's a picture of coffee here. Maybe it's they're going back to the coffee machine 3, 4, 5 times a day. So that can be kind of a red flag. Poor mood management, maybe getting more irritable in meetings, poor focus, maybe being on their phone more, cravings for sweet and salty foods. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that when we're feeling more stressed. The urge to reach for the chips or reach for the candy is going to get more increased. So kind of pay attention to those body warnings as well. And then also, are they taking a lot of sick days? Are they calling off a lot more than usual? So things like that are pretty clear signs you can look out for in employees at work.
And Lydia, before we move on to the next
Yeah,
slide,
of
I
course.
want to highlight that all of these signs that we pulled out here are connected in the research to adrenal fatigue. And there's this big correlation between lowered levels of cortisol and like increased caffeine consumption and ability to regulate your mood, poor focus. So this is really at the point then where like stress is chronic when you are seeing all of these signs in somebody or most of these signs in somebody. So it might be a good time to really check in, see where they're at with things, and otherwise just maybe make it known that things don't seem to be going so well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, and so common sources of workplace stress. So if you see this little bar graph here, this is from the American Psychological Association's annual Stress in America survey. So I have a really interesting website on this actually, but this is kind of their nice overarching one where in their surveyed individuals, about 19-20% of individuals identify their workplace as toxic. And they break it down further into type of work and current work environments. So we can see that in-person is higher than remote work, remote sitting about 13% and in-person about 22%. And type of work, office work sits pretty low, about 14% of people are seeing their workplace environments as toxic compared to customer, client, or patient service is sitting at about 26%. So some things that can contribute to workplace stress or seeing a workplace environment as toxic is low salary, especially salary that is not on par with level of work provided or services provided. Excessive workload, going above and beyond your position frequently, not feeling like you get those rewards, those benefits, recognition of it. Lack of social support. This was a really big one, especially during COVID, where people were more distanced than ever, more socially isolated than ever. And this lack of connection really stifled creativity, engagement, and overall was just another source of stress for workers. So it goes on into also just lack of control over job-related decisions and poor communication from upper management. So workers feeling like they are stuck in a bubble or they don't have enough autonomy over what they do is another big contributing factor to workplace toxicity, perceived workplace toxicity. And here are some broad, I guess, rule of thumb to go by when thinking about your workplace culture, thinking about the things that you offer to your employees. And we will be sticking from more of a mental health perspective on these because like protection from harm, for example, goes a lot into physical harm. So depending on if you are at a construction site, for example, might look a little bit different. But from a mental health perspective, especially post-pandemic, that's really talking about like sanitation practices. During flu season, how well is your office cleaned, sanitized? How well do your employees think that it's all cleaned? And do they feel overall like they can at least protect themselves from illness at their place of work? Connection and community is a big one. I mean, we could go into a whole other presentation just on connection and community. But for a snippet, it's, how do you encourage your employees to collaborate, to connect with each other? One big research suggests is promoting small work groups, like really encouraging work groups, even outside of their traditional ones or the ones that you may have assigned them to, and really allowing people to be individualized in how they like to work. So as long as they are meeting their performance or whatever requirements they might have, their methods can be individualized. So If you have more questions on that one, we can definitely get more into that one. But work-life harmony, we definitely saw a big change in this one with COVID, just given how many hybrid roles, remote roles came up more than ever before. So that one is a pretty big one when it comes to number 3 here. But we also have just overall autonomy, flexibility. So how much flexibility can you offer your employees? I'm sure it's very role dependent, very position dependent, but allowing more of that and more just, again, that autonomy to choose, and overall healthier your workers will be. There is mattering at work, so dignity, meaning. This one could be a hard one to really pinpoint, especially depending on the type of industries that are involved, but purposefulness is a big, big thing in what me and Lydia do, what we talk about quite frequently, and career and job is a very big part of that. So what that might look like for you all is really highlighting like, okay, you guys are all getting assigned this one project for this purpose. This is what this means for your community. This is what this means for your position. And that can really tie into that opportunity for growth. So again, why this matters, why it's important, what you can take away from it, what you're accomplishing by doing this, and really trying to promote all 5 of these factors to ensure that your workers are nice and healthy.
All right, so then we kind of go into systematic strategies to support employees' well-being. I've got a picture of Hamilton here. I see it's a little blurry, and also a sign that says unplugged with a picture of a beach behind it. And the reason I put both of these pictures on this slide specifically was the emphasizing community, as well as encouragement of PTOs and the EAP program. So we'll kind of start with talking about the emphasizing community piece. So emphasizing community in your workplace. So things like prioritizing informal communication, things like that. So things like that. Have a check-in at the start of every meeting to see what everyone's feeling for the day. Where is everyone's headspace at? Maybe on Fridays, have a check-in for the general week. What was everyone's highlight of the week? Where did everyone struggle? Things like that. With the encouragement on PTO, that's going to look more, that really plays into leadership a lot, right? Because if the leader is never taking any PTO, never taking any time off, encouraging employees to not take PTO or things like that, that's not going to create that positive ripple effect where employees also feel comfortable taking PTO when they need it. This isn't saying that people need an excessive amount of PTO, but it is saying that it is important for our brains and our bodies to take that time off. Not to be too therapist-y on everybody, but the example I always use with my clients is that if you put a fish in a dirty tank in that environment and it's swimming in there all the time, that fish is never going to feel better. So it's sometimes good for that fish to get out into a clean tank. And that's kind of what it's like when people take PTO. It shifts our environment, which would shift our mindset, give us some space to breathe, therefore returning to work feeling rejuvenated and ready. As Ellie, I believe, mentioned, when those adrenal fatigues that kicks in for a long period of time, we're not being productive, we're not being creative, we're not feeling motivated to get things done. So it's really important to take that time to unplug. Another way that companies can systematically support this is having things like EAP programs. So providing 12 free sessions of counseling for when this chronic fatigue, chronic stress gets too intense that maybe professional help is needed. And hopefully through some of the slides and things that we showed you guys today, you'll be able to recognize those signs on a little bit of a deeper level. So just making sure you're emphasizing things like that within the community and within your company. So then we kind of move into moving forward. What could this look like? What are some realistic things that you guys can do to help your employees, help yourself to model this kind of positive energy post-COVID, right? Manager training for mental health is a huge way to do that. recognize and respond to supervisees experiencing emotional distress. So when you see an employee, you know, there is a way to go about it, but using words like, hey, I see that you seem a little off lately. Is there anything you'd like to talk about? You know, are you feeling overwhelmed? Are you feeling supported? All of those are really good words to use to kind of gauge where your employees are at, building those skills like open communication, and foster just a better understanding for yourself of how job stressors affect mental health and can be managed. So just staying informed, following the trends, keeping an eye on your employees. Also training for workers, making this a conversation that's not uncomfortable. That's nothing like that. It's a very open and honest conversation within the workforce. And then just some other ideas. So there's lots of resources and stuff out there for mental health and to reduce stress, right? And reducing stress is going to lead to just happier employees, happier people in general, because you're taking that strain off of your body and your brain. So I included a couple things in here. The first one, I'm sure you've all seen, there is a ton of meditation apps out there nowadays. Headspace is one that's pretty well evidence-based, but the reason I add this in here is because they add they have a really good, basically, the word is, I'm using the word for it, but just a good program that companies can buy into and then provide it to their employees for free, right? So it's like, you know, showing like, hey, take 5 minutes to breathe, things like that. Foundations Counseling, that's where Ellie and I are from. We're located in Hamilton. Having a mental health place on deck where you're ready to be like, okay, here's the place you can go if you are feeling overwhelmed. And then just kind of the idea of all of these areas of wellness, making sure your employees are taking care of their hobbies and stuff outside of work, looking at all those areas of wellness, you know, doing some resilience training, maybe a mental health book club, gratitude Fridays. Hopefully, like it was said at the beginning of this presentation, this will kind of be a series we're doing. So diving into different ways in the future, but these are just some ideas right off the bat of ways you can support your employees. So that's kind of where we wrap up for today. So how I wanted to kind of lead into questions. So I found this really good quote that says kind of exactly what we've been talking about. Burnout is the symptom, stress is the source. So we're not starting with burnout here. We're starting with stress, and we're starting with this very little stress that sits for a long time and then gets bigger. So I'm curious to hear from you all. How have you guys seen changes in your workplace since the COVID-19 pandemic? And what have you done to adjust? What have you done to support your employees? And then from there, we can just lead right into questions.
I guess I'll start. I'm kind of a stress creator here, so I apologize to that for my team. But we did make a lot of changes post-COVID. We changed our PTO policy. We increased vacation time, and we have established our first official work from home policy. So my staff can work from home pretty much at any time they want to, as long as they're not all out at the same time. And PTO has nothing to do with vacation. It's completely separate. So,
which is a nice distinction. So we saw quite a lot in the research that there isn't a lot of distinction with PTO versus vacation. They all kind of got lumped into one. And there's definitely a pretty solid connection between time off and productivity at work.
Right.
That happy life balance. Anyone else want to speak on just changes in their own workplaces, changes that they have implemented in the workplace due to COVID?
I work in workforce development, and I would say one thing that we really stress to employers now is that they have to be a whole lot more flexible, because COVID changed that mindset for everyone. It used to be you'd see a job posting and it'd be you need this skill, this skill, and this skill, and now it's just a completely different world. This is what we can do for you. This is why you should want to be a part of our team. It's just a totally different mindset.
Yeah, very much so. And if it seems like all industries are experiencing that to some degree. And it is, like you said, flexibility. People are having to be very flexible and tie it back into the eustress versus chronic stress. Most people were not in that adaptive mindset. So people got left behind or they found themselves underemployed, unemployed. And hopefully we're starting to see that shift and change a little bit here, but yeah, it's all guesses moving forward, what things are really gonna look like.
Said the place that I saw this, and I'm new to the school system. I used to work for Miami for 20 years, so I'm only a couple years here at the Hamilton City Schools. But they did have a program each summer where staff or faculty, whatever that had vacation, could stay around and clean the buildings to get them prepared for the next year, and they could earn more money, continuous through the summer. And notice that most of the ones that used to do that now, since COVID, have valued the time off more than making more money.
We find that a lot too, especially in the younger generations. I think the older generations seem to have that mindset. Well, we're lucky to have a job, but that's changed a lot since COVID, but especially with the younger generations. There's not that same mindset. It's more, I only want to be a part of this job or a part of this team if I'm valued and I have a really great work-life balance, and it's a different world. But Chris is absolutely right.
Certainly,
It's funny to me too. I work with a lot of municipalities and firefighters, EMTs especially. They would rather work 3 or 4 part-time jobs than one full-time job, because that gives them the flexibility to be able to have the schedule that they want and the freedom that they want.
Yeah, I feel like the reality of the situation in the world that we're in now is that like it's changing, and it's exactly what you're saying, right? I think and it's wild. It's wild to me, just like speaking personally, what that looks like from like even 2019 to 2023. Like it feels like 40 years and 5 years at the same time. So it's definitely a different world. And the reality is like employers are going to have to be flexible, because people looking for jobs are not going to want to work for companies that aren't adaptable, especially the younger generations. Like I see it in my college kids all the time, the way they talk about work versus the way even I talked about work in college. It's different.
Way different.
Are there any questions about the presentation, about stress, or about anything that you guys have encountered, that maybe anything like that's on anyone's mind?
I'll kind of chime in here. And I know you've kind of covered this with symptoms and things like that, but there are a lot of people, I'm sure I'm not the only one, who's in denial that I'm not stressed. Are there, are there other factors that could be observed or whatever for people like me who just keep forging ahead saying everything's fine? Like I recognize my employees are stressed, but I'm not stressed. So, and I know that's not reality.
No, that's a great question. So looking at individual stress can be a little bit trickier than, an outsider looking in, because we have to have that awareness, right? And be like, oh yeah, like I'm not doing as well as I used to, or things that I maybe have accomplished a little bit more easily now are a big chore to me. So a big one that I would suggest checking in with is, how is my sleep? Am I sleeping well? Am I tossing and turning? Do I not feel rested when I wake up anymore? Also, other just physical symptoms popping up, like even like hair loss can be a sign of too intense of stress. Skin changes, feeling just that sense of heaviness or fatigue can all be indicators that you need to reduce your workload. Really trying to emphasize what makes you happier, what makes me feel lighter, what makes me feel just more of that like little zing for life than strictly focusing on what do I need to do? What are my responsibilities? Does that answer your question at all?
Yes, and I just copied and pasted all of your screen here so I can refer to it later.
Yes, and I will be sending out, I'm finishing up the final touches, just kind of a handout for all of y'all, just to have more of these resources in a more like clear, like something you could hang up in the office and things like that.
All right. Anyone else have any questions today? Great presentation. Definitely applicable to a lot of situations. So COVID changed a lot of things. COVID maybe improved a few things along the way. Also brought some things to light to employers that they may not have maybe as considered as much as before as they do now, that employees are looking for more flexibility, different things at their jobs and their work-life balance. So I know there's quite a few of you on here today. Anything else, any comments that you all have? Any reasons that you have got on here? Anything that you learned or saw that is definitely something you might take back to your teams?
Are you seeing companies offer more vacation time than they have in the past after COVID?
Based on research, yes. I'm still a little hesitant on saying like, yes, the research strictly supports this because research is just still coming out. COVID still wasn't that long time ago. So we are, yes. And we're also seeing, at least from our roles where we're sitting, there's a lot more EAP out there than ever before.
I feel like it's more of like, yes, employers are offering more PTO, but what we're also seeing is that employees are requesting more. Like people will turn down jobs. Like I have multiple clients in the job market right now, and they are not looking at certain jobs if they do not feel like it has the proper amount of PTO that supports their work-life balance. So that's, you know, those are people in the community that we're working with that are saying these things.
It does create a challenge though, because, you know, if you have long-term employees who have accrued a lot of vacation, the work still has to get done. So, you know, it does kind of actually create another level of stress, because even though there's more vacation time allowed, the work still has to get done. And an organization or business can't necessarily increase staff to get that work done. So, you know, it creates stress on the, you know, the supervisors and the organization. So, you know, that's a challenge as well. And I know, you know, I'll just kind of throw it out there. We see it in our own organization, you know, when people have 3 to 5 weeks vacation a year, and you have a small staff, that's tough to manage and still keep the organization moving forward and growing. So, you know, that's, I think, a new challenge for businesses. Something's got to give. You know, the salaries have increased, vacation PTO have increased, the workload has increased, and you can't increase staff. So, you know, it does create a new stressor on the management and the employees as well, because they, you know, yes, we want them to have vacation time, but at the same time, work's got to get done. So it can't be like, well, I was on vacation. Sorry, got to catch up. You know, so it's that's kind of the reality of it. And I think a lot of businesses and organizations are struggling with that right now. You know, the work-life balancing, I think, is something that you know, businesses support, but at the same time, the work still has to get done. So. You know, and especially a period right now in this area where we're in such extreme economic growth, you know, it's challenged, and you can't just, because you don't want to increase staff and then 6 months later lay them off because you couldn't afford it. So it's, I'm just kind of throwing that out there. So that's a new level of stress for the businesses and organizations.
Dan, I'll have to say that we've seen that in retail, especially the trades, a lot. We were extremely busy during COVID. We all have to be in the office. Their guys are out doing jobs. We don't have flexibility of working from home or taking additional time off. And how do you balance that? It's hard getting employees. You lose employees because there's other opportunities that offer better options for them.
It's definitely, we're definitely going to, it's a lot of adaptation. I think all of this identifying stress, and I think even just starting the conversation around identifying it kind of allows us to even start to answer those questions. Like, it's not as easy for businesses either to keep people, to balance what this new reality of working looks like. So it's definitely, I'm curious to see what like the workforce is going to look like in 10 years. But right now it's definitely, it's not easy for, I think, the majority of people, for leaders, for employees. It's just figuring out what this balance looks like so we can sustain businesses, sustain like economic growth, whatever that looks like, while also making sure everyone's good to go, right? It's definitely going to be a challenge that I think a lot of employers are going to have to meet for sure.
I think there's also going to be some shifts. The employee has kind of been in control for the past few years, and I think that's going to change. I think the pendulum's going to swing back and balance out where, the employees are still being considered, but they don't get to call all the shots like they kind of are in the workplace right now. Jennifer, I think, wanted to say something, so.
Oh, I was just going to comment, I know it takes time to really understand your stressors and really focus on that. Once you understand your feelings and where that root cause comes from, a lot of times that all comes from, childhood. And I've been working on this over the last several years for myself. And I will say it's very transformational once you spend time meditating, journaling, understanding your feelings, and kind of taking a step back instead of reacting right away when you feel a stressor coming on. So I had a perfect example this week where something happened. I sent an email, and normally this first response would have kind of stressed me out, and I was proud of myself because it didn't. The communication was flowing. I had to leave the office and do some things. I come back and it pretty much had corrected itself through communication. And at the end, I praised all of the employees for such amazing communication and teamwork. And I think a little bit of praise and open communication goes a long way. And that comes back to a lot of what they were discussing throughout the screens. So there was some key takeaways for myself in that aspect. And I feel like I'm always the cheerleader within an organization. And people will tend to come to me and they're having a downer day or something and need a little bit uplifted, because we all need that too. But that being said, it takes time, and you have to give yourself forgiveness and give yourself grace and learn and grow from each situation. So that's all I have to say.
No, and that's a great point. I think you're really getting into where our roles really come in. And that's not just for employees, but for all people, is trying to help them find this balance. I mean, we frequently assess for what life dimensions are impacted by your stress, by your mental illness, by whatever's going on. Occupation is major. So these are all these, different tinier faucets that I know Lydia and I would love to get into a little bit more. If you guys would like more specific presentations, we actually disincluded some of our individual strategies dealing with stress just for sake of time and conversation, and stuck with systematic approaches. So we have a lot more that we can speak on with dealing with individualized stress. What can you yourself do, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
So for Ellie and Lydia, if someone would like to get in contact with you, if they have a question or would like some more information, where would they contact each of you?
I will put my email in the chat box. You guys are welcome to reach out, ask me questions. And I know Lydia as well.
Laura, I also want to, as we're wrapping up here, I'll turn it back to you, but I also want to say, you know, we are best actually in this area with some great providers. And, you know, I just want to recognize and thank you for putting it in the chat box so everybody can see that. You know, we have two of our best on today. So it's presentation by Community First, which I really appreciate this. And I know we're going to be doing some more presentations with you guys in the future, but also Modern Psychiatry. So we have two of our most outstanding, you know, mental health providers on the call today. So people feel free to reach out to either one of them. So back to you, Laura.
All right. Well, any last questions for Ellie or Lydia for today? No? All right. Thank you very much for being with us. You two have an amazing presentation. Jennifer, we're looking forward to getting you scheduled on here at some point in the future. And like Dan said, we're definitely going to create like a mental health series. They'll probably be separate from the coffees, but will still be a virtual presentation most likely, maybe some in person too if we need to. So we will be back in a couple weeks. Our next coffee is scheduled for Tuesday, September 12th, 9 a.m. Like Dan said, these are all on our YouTube channel, so you can go back and resource these at any time. Feel free to resource them, share them throughout your company if you need to. And we're also on Facebook Live, so if there's any questions on there, feel free to check that out too. You can always go back and resource it on social media. So we will see you all in a couple weeks then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.